Here's an expanded 1,200-word, simple and interesting version of your Part 1. In a distant corner of the galaxy, far beyond the regions most humans even dreamed of reaching, there was a colony called Varus 9. It was not a massive world, but it was home to thousands of beings who had worked for decades to build a thriving settlement. Their cities glittered under the light of 3 suns, and their fields stretched wide, producing food that sustained not only their own population, but also their neighboring colonies. Life on Varus 9 had always been hard, but it was peaceful. That peace, however, was about to shatter in ways no one could have imagined. One quiet morning, alarms rang out across the colony. The sky, which had always been filled with the calming colors of the triple sunset, suddenly darkened with the shadow of enormous warships. The Dareth Dominion, a ruthless and powerful alien empire, had arrived. Known across multiple star systems for their military might and merciless tactics, the Dareth were feared even by the strongest colonies. And now Varus 9 was their target. The local defense forces of Varus 9, despite their best efforts, were completely overwhelmed. Their ships were smaller, slower, and fewer in number. Ground defenses, designed to withstand minor skirmishes and natural disasters, were no match for the Dareth's advanced weapons. Explosions rocked cities, and the sky filled with the smoke of burning buildings. Panic spread among the citizens. Families huddled together in shelters, clutching each other and praying that someone, anyone, would come to their aid. In the heart of the colony, the Council of Leaders convened urgently. They were intelligent and capable beings, accustomed to managing crises, but this was unlike anything they had ever faced. Every moment that passed meant more destruction, more lives lost. The Council knew they had only one chance. They had to call for help beyond their star system. They had to reach out across the vast emptiness of space, to someone who could bring power and hope where they had none. Sending a message across light years was not easy. It required immense energy and precise calculations, and there was no guarantee that anyone would even receive it. But the Council did not hesitate. Using every resource at their disposal, they broadcasted a distress signal, a plea for assistance, coded in every known universal language. They didn't know who, if anyone, would hear it. All they could do was hope, as the signal traveled, moving faster than light, racing through the empty darkness of space. It carried with it not only coordinates and technical details, but also the desperation, fear, and hope of an entire civilization. Every pulse of the transmission was a heartbeat of Varus 9, crying out across the void, "Help us, please, we are in danger." Across the galaxy, on a planet called Earth, people went about their lives largely unaware of the unfolding crisis. Scientists monitored the skies for signals all the time, listening for anything unusual, patterns that could indicate life or danger. It was one of these scientists, sitting late at night in a quiet observatory, who first noticed the strange transmission. At first it seemed like static, like noise that didn't belong, but there was a rhythm, a structure, something that suggested intelligence. The team worked quickly, decoding the signal as best as they could. When the message became clear, there was a stunned silence in the control room. The words, even when translated, carried a sense of urgency that was impossible to ignore. An entire colony was under attack. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing annihilation. And they were asking for help. Humans had faced many challenges on their own world, natural disasters, wars, and crises, but this was unlike anything they had ever encountered. The vastness of space made the situation feel almost unreal. How could they possibly reach a distant alien world in time? Yet, despite the impossible odds, there was a unanimous understanding among the team. They could not ignore this plea. Humanity had the power to help, and helping was not just a choice, it was a responsibility. Plans were already forming. Even without knowing the full extent of the enemy's strength, humans understood that speed and preparation would be critical. Every moment counted. The scientists, engineers, and strategists who first intercepted the message began communicating with the government and military, outlining the most immediate ways to respond. Discussions were intense and fast-moving. Ships capable of traveling great distances were prepared, weapons were readied, and communication networks were expanded. Meanwhile, the Varus 9 Council continued to fight a losing battle. They could only watch the distant stars, hoping that the universe had someone willing to hear their desperate call. They had no idea that across countless light years humans were already moving, preparing to answer. They did not know that beings they had never met, from a world very different from their own, were reading their messages, feeling their fear, and deciding that they would come. It was not just about military power. Humans, known in some systems for their stubborn bravery and tenacity, were motivated by something deeper. They had a history of stepping into impossible situations to help others, even when the cost was high. They recognized that across the void of space, the life of Varus 9 mattered. These were beings who had families, communities, and dreams just like humans. Ignoring their plea was never an option. As the first human reconnaissance ships began their long journey through the stars, Varus 9 remained under siege. Cities were battered, civilians hid wherever they could, and the defenders fought with everything they had. Yet somewhere deep in their hearts, a small flicker of hope began to grow. Perhaps they thought help was coming. Perhaps they were not as alone as they felt. The story of that day, the day humanity first intercepted the SOS, would later become legendary in both human and alien history. It was a moment when two distant worlds connected in an act of courage and empathy. Across unimaginable distances, across light years of darkness, a message of desperation met a response of resolve. Humanity, even unaware of the full danger that awaited them, chose to act, and that choice would change everything. No one on Earth knew exactly what they were walking into. The strength of the Dareth Dominion was a mystery. The risks were enormous, yet humanity's response was clear. A life in peril was a life worth saving. For Varus 9, that meant a chance to survive. For the humans, it was the beginning of a journey that would test their courage, their strategy, and their very limits. And so, across the emptiness of space, the first signals of human action raced toward the distant colony. Ships would launch, fleets would form, and a distant world on the brink of destruction would soon see that they were not abandoned. In the darkness, one truth became certain. Humanity had heard the SOS, and they would not ignore it. Here's an expanded 1,200-word, simple and interesting version of your Part 2. Back on Earth, the moment the Varus 9 SOS was fully understood, a wave of urgency swept through every level of human society. It was not like responding to a natural disaster or a regional conflict on their own planet. This was different. This was a plea for help from a civilization thousands of light years away, facing destruction at the hands of a powerful alien empire. The very idea of reaching across such an unimaginable distance to protect lives seemed almost impossible. Yet the decision was unanimous. They would act. Within hours, military bases and spaceports that had long been dormant or used for training purposes were suddenly alive with activity. Fleets were mobilized at speeds that no one had thought possible. Engineers ran along corridors checking engines and life support systems. Soldiers trained tirelessly, donning suits that would protect them in environments they had never seen. Every command center across Earth buzzed with urgent activity, as screens flickered with data about distant star systems and potential threats. The entire planet seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for the next step. Commanders from every branch of the military came together to debate strategy. There were endless discussions about how to approach a conflict with a civilization they had never encountered, how to protect civilians in a distant world, and how to counter an enemy whose power they could barely comprehend. Every angle was considered. Maps of star systems were spread out on holographic tables, showing potential routes, supply stations, and zones of danger. Ideas were exchanged quickly, each leader bringing a different perspective. Some argued for a direct strike to overwhelm the enemy quickly. Others advocated for a cautious approach, prioritizing the safety of Varus 9's inhabitants. Meanwhile, scientists worked tirelessly to calibrate weapon systems, ensuring that every missile, every energy cannon, every defensive shield operated at peak efficiency. They ran simulations of battles that could happen far beyond the solar system, calculating possible outcomes and preparing contingency plans. Engineers worked alongside programmers to upgrade artificial intelligence in the ship's command modules, so the Armada could respond to threats in real time, even when human decisions might be delayed by the vast distances involved. Civilians, those who were not directly part of the military or the planning, watched anxiously as the preparations unfolded. News reports broadcast images of ships lifting off, with massive thrusters lighting up launch pads, rockets carrying humans into the unknown. Official statements described the mission as humanitarian, a rescue mission meant to save lives. Families sat in living rooms across the planet, gripping each other's hands as anchors of hope. Children watched with wide eyes, imagining what distant worlds might look like and wondering what it would be like to travel so far, even if only through the stories their parents told them. But those who were closer to the operation understood the stakes. This was not just a humanitarian mission. If anything went wrong, if the fleets were underestimated or the enemy stronger than expected, it could become a battle for survival. Entire crews could be lost, and the consequences might ripple across both Earth and the distant colonies they were rushing to save. There was no room for error. Every decision mattered, and yet there was no hesitation. Humanity's choice had already been made. The risk was worth the hope of saving thousands of lives. Over the course of months, the human armada slowly but steadily took shape. It was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ships of all sizes were prepared, from ancient vessels preserved from centuries past to the latest models bristling with new technology. Some ships had served in minor skirmishes within the solar system, while others had been under construction for decades, their weapons and defenses specifically designed for encounters in deep space. Each ship had a purpose: reconnaissance, defense, attack, or support. And each was crewed by humans who had trained for the possibility that this mission could be the most dangerous in history. The assembling armada was breathtaking in scale. From spaceports on Earth, ships launched in waves, creating trails of fire and light that stretched into the sky. It was as though the planet itself was giving its life force to fuel the journey. Thousands of engineers, pilots, technicians, and soldiers moved in a choreographed rhythm that only came from years of preparation and strict discipline. Orders were shouted, checked, and verified, and every system was inspected multiple times before a ship could leave Earth's orbit. Every vessel carried more than just weapons and supplies. They carried hope. Hope that lives could be saved. Hope that the distance between worlds was not a barrier to compassion. The Armada represented a promise that no call for help, no matter how far away, would ever go unanswered. On board the ships, pilots and crew silently repeated the mantra that they had heard in news reports and training: "We are going to help. We must reach them." That simple idea became their anchor through the months of preparation, through the nights spent calibrating weapons and calculating trajectories, through the endless drills in zero-gravity chambers and simulations. The Armada's formation itself was a marvel of human coordination. Older ships, slower but sturdy, were positioned in the middle, protected by younger, faster vessels that patrolled the outer edges. Supply ships carrying medical equipment, food, and life support units traveled alongside the main attack vessels, ensuring that the fleet could endure a journey that would span thousands of light years. Each captain understood their role perfectly. Every piece of the fleet was a part of a carefully designed puzzle, where a single misstep could compromise the entire mission. At the same time, the human population watched, often unaware of the technical details but fully aware of the scale of the undertaking. News agencies broadcast interviews with astronauts, engineers, and military commanders. Children drew pictures of the fleet and imagined themselves among the stars, rescuing distant alien friends. Writers and artists began telling stories inspired by the fleet's mission, and families discussed the courage it would take to leave Earth behind for months, perhaps years, in order to reach a world so far away. The sense of collective pride and anticipation grew stronger with each passing day. Even as the fleets prepared, the commanders never lost sight of the unknown dangers ahead. The Dareth Dominion's strength was largely a mystery. Humans could guess at their weapons, their strategies, and their numbers, but the reality would only become clear once the fleet entered alien space. Yet the human leaders chose to focus not on fear, but on preparation, skill, and determination. Every ship, every crew member, every calculation was a testament to humanity's unwillingness to turn away from a plea for help. Finally, after months of meticulous preparation, the Armada was ready. Ships lined up in formation, ready to leave Earth's orbit and embark on the long journey to Varus 9. As the thrusters fired and the first vessels rose into space, a wave of emotion swept across Earth. Relief, pride, anxiety, and hope mingled together as people watched the fleet disappear into the blackness of space. For those who remained behind, it was impossible to know what lay ahead. But for everyone who had worked to make this journey possible, there was one shared certainty. Humanity had answered the call. Across the distance, the Varus 9 colony, still under siege and unaware of the specifics of human preparation, had no idea that help was coming. Yet somewhere, millions of miles away, humans were crossing the void, racing against time, carrying not just weapons but a promise that they would not abandon anyone in need. And in that promise, in that determination to act despite the unknown, the heart of humanity shone brighter than any star. Here's an expanded, 1,200-word, simple and interesting version of your Part 3. The situation on Varus 9 had grown dire. The Dareth forces, relentless and ruthless, had pushed deeper into the colony's cities, leaving destruction in their wake. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble, and the once lively streets were now silent except for the sounds of distant explosions and the hurried movement of fleeing civilians. The alien defenders had fought bravely, but their numbers were dwindling, and their morale was strained. Every hour that passed seemed to tip the balance further toward disaster. Then one morning, as the Varus 9 skies glowed with the pale light of the planet's suns, something appeared on the horizon. At first, the defenders thought it was a mirage, a trick of the light, or perhaps a hallucination born of exhaustion and despair. But as the shapes grew larger, clearer, and undeniably real, a stunned silence fell over the battlefield. From the distant stars, the first human warships had arrived. The ships were unlike anything the Varus 9 had ever seen. They glided through space with a sense of purpose and precision that suggested both immense power and remarkable coordination. Their hulls reflected the sunlight in dazzling patterns, and their engines left trails of shimmering energy as they moved. The humans had come not as a single ship, but as entire squadrons flying together in formation so perfect it looked like a choreographed dance in the sky. Each vessel was different in design and size, but together they formed a fleet of unimaginable scale, a force that seemed capable of challenging even the mightiest empires. On the ground, the Varus 9 civilians and soldiers froze in disbelief. Many had given up hope, certain that no help could reach them in time. Yet here it was, a tangible sign that they were not alone, that across the void of space someone had heard their cries and chosen to act. Mothers clutched their children tightly, soldiers lowered their weapons in astonishment, and even the council members who had sent the SOS felt a rush of hope so strong it left them momentarily speechless. The Dareth invaders, for their part, were equally taken aback. Used to domination and accustomed to fear from their enemies, they were not prepared for this sudden, overwhelming arrival. Their initial confidence faltered as the humans moved with precision and speed that defied expectation. The Dareth had assumed that the colony would be easy to subdue, and that reinforcements from distant worlds would never arrive in time. Their calculations had been brutally wrong. Then, without warning, the humans struck. The first attacks were swift, deliberate, and devastating. Missiles streaked across the sky with deadly accuracy, disabling the Dareth ships before they could fully respond. Energy cannons fired in perfectly coordinated sequences, targeting critical systems while leaving the colony itself largely intact. It was not reckless destruction. It was calculated, precise, and almost surgical in its execution. The Dareth, who had expected an easy conquest, suddenly found themselves on the defensive, forced to retreat and regroup in ways they had never needed to before. On the ground, the Varus 9 citizens watched in awe. They had heard stories of distant humans, but seeing them in action was beyond anything they could have imagined. These strangers from across the stars were fighting not for territory, not for wealth, not for conquest, but to protect lives. Every maneuver of the fleet seemed designed to save as many as possible, while neutralizing the enemy. Soldiers who had been ready to surrender found new courage, inspired by the arrival of these allies who risked everything for their survival. The battle unfolded over hours, each moment more intense than the last. Human ships moved like a single organism, covering each other's weaknesses and amplifying their strengths. Reconnaissance drones darted ahead, providing real-time data that allowed the fleet to anticipate enemy movements. Heavy bombers delivered precise strikes on Dareth formations, while faster interceptors swept in to protect the colony and block any counterattacks. Every action was coordinated, every decision calculated, yet the humans fought with a visible sense of purpose that radiated across the battlefield. Even the aliens on the front lines of Varus 9 began to realize the full scale of the human effort. They had never encountered an army that moved so quickly, yet so efficiently, responding to threats as if it were a single mind controlling countless bodies. Some of the defenders whispered among themselves, awestruck, "Who are these humans? How can they fight like this?" There was admiration and even a glimmer of envy. at the combination of skill, technology, and unwavering dedication displayed in the skies above. Civilians, huddled in shelters or peeking cautiously from windows, could only watch as the tides of battle shifted before their eyes. Each victory of the humans brought new hope. The fear that had weighed heavily on the colony since the Dareth attack began to lift, replaced by a cautious optimism. Children, once crying from terror, now whispered prayers of thanks for the mysterious saviors who had come across the stars. Families clung together, watching the fleet dance above the ruins, realizing that survival was now within reach. The Dareth, on the other hand, were confused and disoriented. Their training had prepared them for battle against formidable enemies, but never for this. They had assumed their strength alone would be enough, that intimidation and superior numbers would secure victory. Instead, they found themselves facing an opponent that was unpredictable, relentless, and guided by something they did not understand, a commitment to protect life rather than to destroy it. Every maneuver the humans made countered their plans. Every strike weakened their forces, and slowly, the tide of the battle began to turn. It was not just the humans' weapons that made the difference, but their approach to combat. Unlike the Dareth, who relied on sheer force and fear, humans used strategy, intelligence, and cooperation. They anticipated enemy actions, adapted quickly to changing circumstances, and used their resources in ways that maximized efficiency. Every strike was intentional, every movement deliberate, and their focus on saving lives made them an entirely new kind of threat, one the Dareth had never faced. As hours passed, the Varus 9 defenders joined the effort, emboldened by the humans' presence. Their own attacks became more effective, coordinated now with the fleet above them. Resistance that had once seemed futile now felt possible, and for the first time since the attack began, the colony's soldiers dared to hope for a future beyond destruction. They realized that these distant beings had crossed unimaginable distances to help them, and their courage and determination grew in response. By the end of the first day, the battlefield had transformed. The Dareth were no longer the unstoppable force they had once appeared to be. Their formations were disrupted, their morale shaken, and their plans thrown into chaos. Varus 9, once on the brink of despair, now saw the first signs of hope in what had seemed like an impossible situation. Civilians and soldiers alike watched in amazement as the humans continued their relentless, coordinated assault, proving that even across light years, bravery and determination could make all the difference. The presence of the humans, those mysterious saviors from a distant world, changed everything. Their arrival did not just provide immediate relief, it gave the Varus 9 colony something even more powerful: hope. The message was clear. Across the void, humanity had answered the call. They had come not for conquest, not for profit, but to protect life. And in that moment, as human warships moved with incredible precision and purpose, the Varus 9 people knew that they were not alone. They were being saved. Here's an expanded 1,200-word simple and interesting version of your Part 4. The battle over Varus 9 stretched on for days, each one more intense than the last. The skies were filled with the roar of engines, the flashes of energy weapons, and the trails of missiles arcing across space. On the ground, the sounds of combat, explosions, alarms, and the hurried shouts of defenders echoed through the cities and streets. The Dareth Dominion, confident in their power, had assumed that the colony's defenders might call for help from neighboring systems. They expected reinforcements to arrive, but certainly nothing of the scale or capability they were now facing. The humans had arrived in numbers that dwarfed anything the Dareth had anticipated. Fleets moved in precise formations, each ship acting as part of a larger living network. Human tactics were unlike anything the invaders had experienced before. They did not simply attack. They adapted constantly, responding to threats in ways that were unpredictable yet perfectly calculated. Sometimes they would strike with overwhelming force, destroying key positions in moments. Other times they would hold back, allowing the enemy to make mistakes and then exploiting them with surgical precision. Every maneuver seemed guided by instinct and intelligence, a combination that left the Dareth scrambling to keep up. For the first time, the Dareth began to realize that their assumptions had been completely wrong. They had expected a quick, easy victory, a collapse of the alien defenders followed by the capture of the colony. But the humans, who had crossed countless light years to answer a plea for help, were not interested in conquest. They were focused entirely on one goal: protecting lives and restoring safety to Varus 9. The Dureth had underestimated not only the humans' firepower, but also their determination and willingness to take risks for the sake of others. On the surface of Varus 9, the alien defenders found new energy in their fight. They had once felt isolated and hopeless, struggling against an enemy far stronger than themselves. But with humans in the skies above, every push of the Dureth back was met with hope. Soldiers regained lost ground, reclaiming streets and neighborhoods that had been overrun. Small squads, once hesitant, now moved with confidence, coordinating their efforts with the human fleet above. Every victory, no matter how small, inspired the defenders to fight harder, to take chances they had previously avoided, and to believe in the possibility of victory. The humans' unconventional tactics were a constant source of confusion for the Dureth. They were unprepared for strategies that mixed aggressive attacks with carefully timed retreats, feints, and diversions. A human squadron might vanish from one part of the battlefield, only to reappear where the enemy least expected, cutting off reinforcements or targeting critical command ships. They used the terrain of Varus 9 to their advantage, positioning ships to protect the colony's cities while simultaneously pressuring the enemy in unexpected ways. It was a kind of warfare that emphasized brains as much as brawn, and it worked with devastating effect. As the days passed, the balance of the battle began to shift. The Dureth forces, once confident and unyielding, grew cautious. Their formations were disrupted, their morale weakened, and their supply lines began to falter. Each human strike, each successful defense by the Varus 9 forces, chipped away at the invaders' dominance. The humans had not only arrived as reinforcements, they had become the deciding factor in the conflict, a force that no one on Varus 9 or in the Dureth ranks had expected. The turning point came during the climactic days of the battle. A human flagship, larger and more advanced than any other ship in the fleet, took the lead in a daring assault. It moved through the enemy lines with speed and precision, targeting the heart of the Dureth formation. Energy weapons fired in coordinated bursts, disabling multiple ships at once. Missiles struck key supply vessels, cutting off the enemy's ability to reinforce their troops on the ground. The human flagship's bold approach inspired other ships to follow, creating a wave of coordinated strikes that pushed the Dureth back step by step. On the surface, the Varus 9 defenders seized the opportunity. With the enemy's attention focused on the human fleet, they launched counterattacks in areas that had been previously lost. Streets were reclaimed, barricades were reinforced, and key installations were retaken. Civilians emerged from hiding to assist in small but important ways, carrying supplies, helping wounded soldiers, and providing intelligence about enemy movements. The synergy between the humans and the Varus 9 defenders became a turning tide in the battle, demonstrating how unity and coordination could overcome even overwhelming odds. The Dureth, for the first time, faced the reality that they could be defeated. Their initial arrogance gave way to desperation as their forces were slowly eroded. Commanders shouted orders, but human unpredictability and the clever maneuvers of Varus 9 defenders left them scrambling. They had never encountered an enemy that combined courage, strategy, and compassion so effectively. Every miscalculation was exploited, every hesitation punished. The Dureth realized that the humans were not just reinforcements, they were the key to the colony's survival. In the final moments of the conflict, the human flagship led one last, decisive assault. It penetrated the remaining Dureth defensive lines and struck at the enemy's command hub, sending a shockwave through their fleet. Key ships were disabled, supply lines destroyed, and the enemy's organization crumbled. The Dureth soldiers, who had once believed victory was certain, were now forced into retreat. There was no chance of regrouping. The human fleet's tactics had left them with no viable options. Slowly, methodically, the remaining invaders pulled back, leaving Varus 9 largely intact and under the control of its defenders. When the dust settled, the landscape of Varus 9 was scarred, but the colony had survived. The victory was not just a testament to human firepower, but to their unwavering commitment to protect life. The collaboration between humans and Varus 9 defenders had turned what seemed like an impossible situation into a historic triumph. Soldiers and civilians alike celebrated cautiously, knowing that while the battle had ended, the memory of the Dureth threat would remain for a long time. The human presence had changed everything. They had come across unimaginable distances to answer a call for help, and in doing so, They had demonstrated a principle that would be remembered for generations, that even against the most powerful enemies, courage, strategy, and the will to protect others could triumph. The Dareth, forced to retreat, never returned to Varus 9, and the galaxy itself took notice. Humanity had shown that they were not just capable of defending their own world, but of extending their reach across the stars to save lives wherever they were threatened. In the aftermath, the Varus 9 people looked to the sky with gratitude and awe. The humans who had arrived as strangers had become heroes. Their actions had not only protected a colony but had inspired hope across the galaxy. Stories of the battle would be told for generations, of how the Dareth had been pushed back by a combination of human ingenuity, bravery, and compassion. The final stand of the human flagship had become a symbol of what it meant to answer a call for help. No matter the distance, no matter the danger. Here's an expanded 1,200-word, simple and interesting version of your Part 5. Months passed after the Dareth forces had been driven from Varus 9, and slowly the colony began to heal. The devastation had been severe. Buildings were in ruins, streets were torn apart, and the natural landscape had been scarred by the violence of the battle. Fires had long since burned out, and smoke no longer filled the skies, but the memory of destruction remained etched in the minds of the survivors. Yet even in the midst of what had once seemed hopeless, the people of Varus 9 began the difficult task of rebuilding their homes, their communities, and their lives. Every corner of the colony was touched by this effort. Engineers and architects worked tirelessly to restore the structures that had been damaged, but they also improved them. Streets were widened, buildings were reinforced, and protective systems were installed to prevent future attacks from causing the same level of destruction. Families returned to the neighborhoods that had once been abandoned, clearing debris and salvaging whatever they could from the ruins. Markets reopened, children returned to schools, and slowly normalcy returned. The process was painstaking and required patience, but the citizens of Varus 9 were determined. They had survived an impossible threat, and now they would reclaim their home. Central to this rebuilding were the monuments. The Council of Varus 9 decided that the story of humanity's intervention should never be forgotten. Across the planet, monuments began to rise, made from a combination of salvaged materials from both Varus 9 and the human fleet that had come to their aid. Pieces of ships, broken weapons, and remnants of buildings were carefully incorporated into the structures, creating something both beautiful and symbolic. These monuments were more than decorations. They were messages to the future, tangible reminders of courage, solidarity, and hope. Each monument bore a simple inscription. We asked. Humans came. The words were etched in multiple languages, including those spoken by the Varus 9 people and several known universal dialects. The message was clear and deliberate. It was not a boast or a declaration of dominance. It was a tribute to humanity's courage and compassion. It told anyone who saw it that, even across impossible distances, life was valued and help could arrive when it was most needed. Citizens, young and old, visited the monuments, placing flowers or small offerings in gratitude. Families told stories to their children about the day humans arrived, ensuring that the memory would last for generations. News of the human intervention spread far beyond Varus 9. Across the galaxy, diplomats, traders, and travelers spoke of the event with amazement. Some viewed humanity with newfound fear, realizing that a species capable of coordinating such a massive and successful effort across light years was not to be underestimated. The humans' arrival had been swift, precise, and effective. No enemy, no matter how powerful, could easily stand against them. Others, however, found hope in humanity's actions. The story became a symbol of what was possible when courage and solidarity were combined. If humans could travel across the stars to save a distant civilization, then perhaps other beings could act similarly in the future. Political leaders and diplomats used the event as a reference in their work. Treaties were negotiated with the memory of humanity's heroism in mind. Leaders cited the mission to Varus 9 as proof that cooperation, even among species with vastly different cultures and technologies, could change the course of history. Conferences were held to discuss how civilizations could respond to crises beyond their own worlds, and plans were made to ensure that future SOS calls, wherever they might come from, would be heard and acted upon. The impact of humanity's intervention rippled outward, influencing diplomacy, strategy, and interstellar relations. For the people of Varus 9, the lessons were personal. Families who had lost homes or loved ones found solace in the knowledge that someone had come to help, even when hope seemed impossible. Children learned that bravery and compassion could cross unimaginable distances, and that the universe was not an uncaring place. Survivors spoke of humanity with reverence, not only for their power but for their willingness to act selflessly. Stories of the battle and the rebuilding became part of the colony's culture, shaping art, literature, and education for years to come. Humans themselves, far back on Earth, watched reports and messages from Varus 9 with a mixture of pride and humility. They had set out to answer a call for help, fully aware of the risks involved, yet they had never sought fame or recognition. Their actions had been guided by a simple principle: no life in danger should be ignored. And now, months later, they could see the impact of their decision. The monuments, the rebuilt cities, and the grateful messages from the Varus 9 people were proof that their efforts had not been in vain. The story of the human Armada became legendary. Across multiple star systems, bards, historians, and news networks recounted the tale of the distant beings who had come to protect Varus 9. Tales were told of the fleet's precision, the bravery of the soldiers, and the unwavering commitment to save lives rather than claim victory or territory. The memory of the battle and the rebuilding inspired other civilizations to take similar action when faced with distant crises. It was a demonstration of the principle that even in a vast and sometimes hostile galaxy, compassion could prevail. Over time, the monuments themselves became cultural centers, places where people would gather to remember the past and celebrate the future. Children learned the story as part of their education, and families would visit on anniversaries, telling new generations about the day humans arrived. Festivals and ceremonies were held to honor the courage of both the Varus 9 defenders and their distant allies. Artworks and sculptures depicted the fleet in flight, energy trails of thrusters and weapons immortalized in metal and glass. Music and literature celebrated the day hope crossed the stars, transforming fear into determination. The impact of humanity's action was not limited to Varus 9 alone. Across the galaxy, civilizations began to reconsider what it meant to act in the face of danger. Plans were made for collaborative defense networks, emergency communication protocols were improved, and discussions of ethical responsibilities across species became more common. Humans had shown that even when worlds were separated by vast distances, the bonds of empathy and courage could unite them. Their example challenged other civilizations to reconsider isolation and self-interest in favor of cooperation and protection of life. For Varus 9, the final lesson was clear. Survival was not only a matter of strength or strategy, it was also about trust, courage, and the willingness to reach out to others. The colony had faced annihilation, yet it had endured because someone had chosen to act. The monuments inscribed with the simple words, "We asked, humans came," were more than stone and metal. They were a promise, a reminder that across the galaxy, help was possible, that bravery and compassion could overcome fear and destruction. And so, the story of Varus 9 and the human Armada became part of galactic history. Humanity had proven that no call for help, no matter how distant, no matter how dangerous, would ever go unanswered. The legacy of that mission lived on in rebuilt cities, grateful people, and monuments that spoke louder than words. Across star systems, the tale inspired hope, courage, and unity. A reminder that even in a universe filled with uncertainty and danger, the choices of a determined few could change the course of history forever.